And at the house where this party occurred, it was a young married couple, and most of the others were single, and a girl was slain there. And when he opened up this grocery store, he had hired this woman at whose house this party was as cashier. And when it got around that she was working there, and as people are ignorant, or they were more so at that time, this girl had a bad name because someone was killed at her house. So he couldn't keep her. He says, pay her off and fire her. Well, I'll tell you, I've hired and fired a lot of people in my life, but that was the worst thing I ever had to do. This girl was innocent. She needed a job. She was divorced from her husband, and it was not her fault. And I took her home in the truck, and she broke down and cried not like a baby, but like a person whose heart was going to come out. Then Sam, being a young kid, and his father not being around, he'd come to the store and take the delivery truck and go cruising and speeding up and down the street. Excuse me. So one day I got up over my head with him, and I gave him a beating he wouldn't forget for a while. And
How old was Sam then?
huh?
How old was Sam?
Oh, I would say Sam was maybe 15, 16 years old. And I gave, huh?
Sam would be past 65.
All right.
Past 65, 68 years old, something like that.
No, I don't think he's that old. But anyway, I gave him a beating, and when his father come around, he said, what do you have to do that? He's only a kid. I says, he's only a kid. If he's old enough to drive, and he's old enough to run around, he's old enough to act like a human being. And I said, I'm sick and tired of it, and I quit, and I went back to Chicago.
What was that?
Oh, I would say about 36, 37. And meanwhile, I don't remember the circumstances of your father leaving there, but he went back to Chicago, and he sold food to taverns, and but he and Jimmy and I used to pal around together before your father got married.
Jimmy Roth.
Jimmy
was
Roth.
Teresa's first husband.
And your father had an Essex boat. It was shaped like a boat, an Essex Roadster that was shaped like a boat. And we would have some times with that. And when he would go to Chicago on Saturday night, and sometimes we wouldn't get into Chicago to 12, 1 o'clock, am I right?
Right.
And I would ride with him, and then he would go romance with take your mother out and visit his family, and I would go visit my family, and then we would meet someplace on Sunday night and drive back to Gary. Sometimes it was so damn foggy driving back you couldn't see your hand in front of you. But the relationship that I've had with your father has not been like a cousin. I would say it's more like a brother, and more like a brother who got along very well with each other.
We still do.
So I don't know of any time in my life that we ever had differences, even when we were working in the same store.
You said my father used to run around a lot. What do you mean by that?
I didn't say I say we all used to run around a
Don't
lot.
forget, oh, you forgot, Hank was with me too. Hank Canal.
Yeah, but
I was
that,
very close with him too.
well, that
We
was,
lived together for a long.
yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I was,
And he worked for Uncle too.
yeah, Hank Kennard left before I came out there.
Yeah.
He and Hank Kennard used to have a room over on 15th and, what was it, Jackson?
11th and Jackson.
No, behind that.
11th Avenue, one block south of 11th Avenue, on Jackson, on the second floor.
Yeah, and across from a Catholic church.
Right, Greek church or something.
And I don't know, maybe Hank was in Chicago, but I used to come out and I stayed with you a couple of times. And boy, did his feet smell.
I was thinking feet, yeah.
Yeah, you told us about the problems with your feet.
Yes, I did.
How that, it's a black woman you said.
Black woman that came in, she looked at it, she saw the vapor coming through my leather to my shoes. And she says, "Gee, you must have sore dogs." I says, "That isn't the word for it." So he says, "You want to get rid of it?" I said, "Yeah, I used to bury my socks. I couldn't stand them myself." He said, "Take them out in the yard and bury them." It was stinking so bad. He says, "Take some of that brown soap." He used to sell soap that time by the pound. You know, he used to come in a keg with a brown soap.
Like American Family.
Family used to cut a piece and sell it so much a pound, penny a pound, whatever it was. And buy yourself some cotton socks. We had socks, we used to sell them for 5 cents a pair. And I think it was 35 cents a dozen. Well, I bought a dozen pair of socks. And she said, "Go home and wash with that soap and cold water. Not hot water, but cold water. And change them. During the day, when their feet get hot, flush your toilet out, go in the toilet, wash your feet again in cold water, a new pair of socks. Put another clean pair of socks on. With 1 week's time, no more sweaty feet, no more stinking socks. As a matter of fact, since then I've been wearing 2 pair all the time. If I had to wear the black stock or any other color, always had white ones underneath. And I still wear white ones.
So what was your social life in those days? Working so hard, did you get a chance to get out much hard?
We got out, but I'll say this, our social life is not for posterity. We got around, and with that camera off, I could tell you some stories.
Well, are there any stories that you can tell in the clean version?
Oh yes, this Roth family, they were a very large family, and Louis Roth, he brought his whole family out, his father and mother and brothers and sisters.
4 brothers and 4 sisters.
And we used to go up there, and these girls would have parties, and we'd have good times. We had good times, very good times.
Although their mothers didn't approve of us because we weren't religious enough, because they come from one of the state of a very religious family. And Louis Roth's wife, turned Jewish. She was Gentile. She turned Jewish. As a matter of fact, he brought his father over first, and a year before he brought the rest of the family out. And his father was the one who was teaching Ruth every day about the kashrut guide and the dishes and everything, you know. And she was a better Jewish woman than any Jewish girl out there. Everything was kept just so.
She was a very modern person.
Very modern person. She had a family over there too, brothers. She had, I think, brothers and
Sure,
sisters.
Martin.
Martin, so on. And of course they were Gentile, but she the one who brought up the children, and she brought them up in the Jewish way. She kept a kosher home.
Very modern and a very pretty woman.
So there was Jimmy, and then Jimmy was married to Teresa. I don't know about
Jimmy
Teresa.
married after Teresa, and of course,
Oh, I remember now. When Jimmy got married to Teresa, I don't know if I should say this, but you weren't there, and you
I was there.
no you or if you weren't, were you back in Gary by that time?
Yeah, he cried. He cried when he's back.
Well, Jimmy and I were out the night before, and Jimmy broke down and cried, and said, "I don't love that girl." And it so happened on New Year's Eve, he had taken Teresa out, and they were in an automobile accident. And she had her sights set for him, and he promised to marry her. But I told him, "Jimmy, why ruin your life?" I says, "Call it off." "No, I can't do that. It was too embarrassing." Well, he got married, and after that, that was another reason I left, because I figured if I would have stayed there, and knowing how he felt, I would have contributed to the breaking up of the marriage.
Well, the marriage lasted until the late 1940s, around 48 they split up, something like that, 47.
Let's see.
It was after the war when Teresa moved to California, left Jimmy, and
That's right, because I was a witness to his divorce. I went up to the court with him.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in Gary. at that
I went
time.
to court
Yeah.
with him.
But
that was in California.
That's the only way she agreed to divorce him, if he would give her enough to come to California, settle in California. And he did. I think her uncle Brown, was it? He was out here.
that was her brother-in-law, Brown,
No,
married to her sister.
It was Margaret's, it
Brown
was
was
Sheldon
not
Brown's
her
father.
brother-in-law. I'm not talking about the Brown that was married to Frida. I'm talking about another Brown.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, they came out here and they, I think they bought a home or something, and they gave her everything that she needed, and they settled out here. He came to visit them once or twice a year,
Once a year.
or once. Every time he came, they slept together. They were divorced, but they slept together. And meantime, he was married about 3-4 times after that.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 times.
4 times that he was married after that. And he liked women. And his business was a success. And he wanted to go bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, they opened up a what you would call a supermarket. And, well, he was pretty well connected in Gary as far that is concerned with the politicians and the other stuff. He knew him pretty well. He was very active in with them. Well, there was a fellow that when he joined the co-op, what was it called, the
Grocer's co-op.
grocery co-op. There was one fellow in there that they didn't like each other. Well, that fellow happened to be the manager of the co-op. And he had it against Jimmy. And when he opened up the store, it was, it took him a long time because he traveled all over to get ideas, how to put in the latest fixtures and the latest display and so forth. He came out here in California a few times to look at the big markets because it was a pretty big proposition. Well, I don't know if you know the details of it or not, but anyway, he was shooting a lot of specials, and there was a lot of stealing from him, theft. You know, people didn't pay. Whether they had credit business at that time, I don't know. I think it was cash.
No, well, I don't think you know the
Details.
detail
But anyway,
because
he had to go broke.
by that time you were out in California
I was out in
and I was
California.
back in Gary
Yeah.
again. No. You see, after I left Gary, I went back to Chicago, and then I went in the Army. And after I got out of the Army, I went back to work in Chicago for a year. And Jimmy insisted that I come back to Gary. And his younger brother had a grocery store, a small grocery store and meat market like they had in those days. And he wasn't making a success of it. So I took it over, and Jimmy guaranteed the financing of it. And I was there for 10 years. And we were, like I
And you
said,
was married to Chips by then.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I was married by that time, but we were still just as close as can be. And this fellow that I bought the grocery store from, his younger brother, he worked a short time for his older brother Louis, and then he went in business in the Mexican neighborhood, and he made a huge success of it. And he wanted to go. He sold the store. He sold the store to his brother's daughter's husband, Shelley Block, and he wanted to open a big supermarket, which there weren't any or many at that time. And at that time, I'd lost my lease in the grocery store I was in, and this guy was living in California, and he wanted me to buy that broken down building, and he wanted an exorbitant price, and I wouldn't buy it. Well, he wanted me to go in business with him, but I didn't want any part of the grocery business anymore.
You're talking about Abe Ross.
Yeah. So he got another fellow by the name of Eddie Green, and they scraped together and they built a supermarket, and they did very well. Well, that sort of irked Jimmy to see his brother, who he put in business and took care of, making a big success, and he was still in the grocery and liquor store in the black neighborhood in Gary. And about that time, Lenny, his oldest son, was out of school, and Jay, his youngest son, was graduating out here, UCLA, and I guess he took up business administration or supermarket management or something like that. So he figured, well, he said, now I'm going to set up my boys for life. And he put them in the business with himself, and he was undercapitalized, I'll say that. And his boys didn't want to pitch in and work. What I mean is, if it meant going on the floor and packing shelves or taking care of produce, they wanted to sit on their butts in the office, and Jimmy worked like a mule. And it was a new neighborhood, and it wasn't ripe for a supermarket, and he got in trouble. And that was his downfall.
How long ago did Jimmy pass away?
Jimmy passed away, it's going to be 9 years, because my wife made me a 60th birthday surprise party, and Jimmy was there, and he needed an operation, and but anyway, I told him, you go and have the operation, and don't worry about the money. And he had the operation, and it was supposed to be a success, but he died there from, the doctor said, from pneumonia. It was supposed to be a heart bypass or something like that, something to do with the heart.
So Jimmy was then mid-60s at that time.
Jimmy was 63. Jimmy was 3 years older than me and 3 years younger than Sid. Between Sid and I, there was 6 years different, and Jimmy was right in between.
So you felt that Lenny and Jay sat on their hands and really didn't chip in when their dad
No.
needed them?
No.
I would. I'm not trying to. I'm not pulling any punches, but they were not an asset to the business. They were too young, and they had too much going for them, and they didn't know how to handle it.
He put too much hope in him. He anticipated more out of them than he could get.
You see, Jimmy didn't go to school in the United States. He was a very brilliant man, but he thought, since my boys have gone to UCLA and they took up these courses, that they should know what they're doing. And he put too much trust in them. Jimmy was the type of fella, he knew how to make money, but he didn't know how to hold on to it. And I'll explain that. There are probably 2-3 dozen people in Gary who owe whatever success they have had to that man. Because if somebody needed financing or something, he didn't have the money to give them, but somehow he would manage to stand good for those people. And every time he expanded his business, he didn't have the money, but he'd make a deal where he would pay them off, and he would pay everybody off. And even when he went broke in the grocery business, in the supermarket business, he still had ambitions of paying everybody off. But his health deteriorated, and it was a severe blow to him, because all his life he'd been a success. I don't say he wasn't a millionaire, but he was a big success and he was respected. And when it came to charity, he gave 5 times as much and maybe 10 times as much as the average fella in his circumstances.
How was your Uncle Dave when it came to the tzedakah?
When he came to what?
Charity, tzedakah.
Oh, tzedakah?
Oh, I'll tell you what it, I was in business, and they used to, well, they take up a collection every year for the United Jewish Fund. And they would publish in Gary the amount everybody gave. And I think that year I gave $300 or something. And I think he gave less than that. And when he come out, he says it was nice of you to give that much money. And he says, you know, that money that I give is just a drop in the bucket. He says, I give so much to this, so much to that, so much to that, and I'm helping everybody from hither to yon. I says, good. I says, well, you don't have to tell me. I'm not interested. But to the person that didn't know him, he was the biggest giver and the most charitable person on earth. But not in my eyes.
I don't know if I told you or not, my mother and dad, during the Depression, we had a fire, a store in the restaurant burned down. And they had to naturally rebuild it. So they were short on money. So they approached Uncle Dave, where he could loan him $400 or $500. Well, he couldn't say no. He said, I'll see that you have it. So he went over to Hershkovich, and he said, Hershkovich, and he says, look, my linker has to have $500. He says, right, my money's tied up, I can't, I'll guarantee the $500. Hershkovich, you give it to Hershkovich. So he looked at him and said, you're going to guarantee for Linka? With my mother? Because, we were so close.
He lived there with
We
him.
lived there with her. He says, who's going to guarantee for you?
No, he said, if I had it, nobody would have to guarantee it.
Anyway, he did raise the money. He gave. The Hershkovich is going to help put it out.
Sure, but he said
He got the money.
He
But,
says you don't have to guarantee it. I'll be glad, or I'll loan it to her, and I'll be glad to trust her. Words to that effect. But he was always a big shot with somebody else's money.
Well, he drove the first Cadillac.
Yeah, he had money for everything.
Bought a nice home, French furniture that was boarded off. You could walk into the living room over there because it was all boarded up, all French. Those little statues, all the crap that it was fancy French style home.
I wouldn't even give him the satisfaction of being in praising him or even talking.
On McKinley Street he was.
Yeah, 552 McKinley.
552 McKinley Street.
I lived there.
You lived there with him? Before you were married?
Yeah.
When was that?
1932.
And you married when you lived in Gary, didn't you?
No.
Or you married in Chicago?
When I went back to Chicago.
Okay, how did you meet your wife?
At a dance.
How old were you then?
Oh, about 25, 26.
And how long did you know her before you were married?
probably a year.
Okay, what was your wife's name?
Well, her name was Sandra, but they called her Chips.
So, what can you tell us about your wedding? What do you remember about